March 1st, 1943. Dawn breaks at 6:43. A teenage mathematics student stands motionless in a Liverpool basement, staring at linoleum marked with chalk lines. Janet Patricia Okell is 19 years old. She's spent 8 months orchestrating war games on this floor. The simulation results spread before her match, with horrifying precision. The convoy attack that claimed her brother's life just 48 hours ago. The stakes couldn't be clearer. Retrain 5,000 naval officers before September arrives, or Britain faces starvation. 0 admirals believe her calculations. In less than an hour, this girl, armed with nothing more than chalk dust and a stopwatch, will demonstrate that British naval doctrine has been systematically killing its own sailors for 3 full years. Every admiral present has executed that doctrine flawlessly while watching convoys burn around them. The telegram arrived on February 27th. HMS Hesperus, total loss, entire crew. Convoy SC-121 had been hit by U-boat assault. 0 survivors recovered. Her brother Thomas was 23, serving as a destroyer officer specialising in anti-submarine operations. 3 weeks prior, his letter had described escort duty for an incoming convoy. His words had been troubling. The standard procedures weren't delivering results anymore. Ships kept vanishing regardless of their efforts. His instincts had proven tragically accurate. SC-121 had departed Halifax on the 15th of February. 59 cargo vessels protected by 9 destroyer escorts in regulation formation. Everything executed precisely as training mandated. The U-boats made contact on the 24th, launching nighttime surface assaults with wolfpack coordination. British escorts responded exactly as their training dictated. Aggressive submarine pursuit, depth charge deployment, illumination rounds. By February 26th at sunrise, 13 cargo ships were going down. 72,000 tons lost. 6 escort vessels sustained damage. HMS Hesperus took a torpedo strike while pursuing a submarine that had already submerged and slipped away. The destroyer split apart and disappeared in 4 minutes. 117 sailors perished. Thomas drowned in freezing Atlantic waters because his vessel abandoned convoy position to hunt a submarine that escaped anyway. Janet had already run that identical scenario in the tactical pit 8 separate times. 8 different simulations. Every single iteration saw escorts chase submarines and create gaps in convoy protection. Every single time, convoys suffered catastrophic losses. She'd informed Captain Roberts the tactics were fundamentally flawed. Roberts had concurred. They'd compiled reports, submitted tactical recommendations to the Admiralty, provided mathematical proof explaining why aggressive pursuit tactics were destroying convoys. The Admiralty dismissed them. Watteau remained experimental, they argued. Actual combat experience outweighed flaw simulations. Officers with 3 decades at sea possessed superior judgment to teenage girls with chalk sticks. Thomas died following those orders, executing that doctrine, implementing tactics Janet had mathematically proven fatal 8 months before his convoy departed port. She'd been standing in the tactical pit when the telegram reached Derby House, midway through a simulation, playing U-boat commander against a convoy under Lieutenant Morrison's command. She was winning again. Her submarines had breached the escort perimeter because Morrison's destroyers had pursued her decoy submarine away from convoy position. Standard operating procedure, standard outcome. The convoy was being systematically destroyed. Roberts intercepted her, handed her the telegram. Naval casualty notifications typically went to family residences, but Janet had designated Watteau as her duty station. Derby House received the wire. She read it. HMS Hesperus lost with all hands. Thomas. Roberts offered her time to leave, process the loss. Janet declined. She needed to complete the simulation, needed to demonstrate to Morrison precisely why his tactics had just destroyed 12 merchant vessels, needed to ensure no additional officers departed Derby House believing aggressive pursuit saved convoys, because it accomplished the opposite. It annihilated them. The tactical pit maintained constant cold. Derby House basement provided inadequate heating, concrete walls that constantly wet moisture. The floor represented 900 miles of North Atlantic Ocean. Chalk grids marked navigation coordinates. Wooden models represented vessels. Black pieces for U-boats, white for escorts, red for torpedoed merchants. By March 1943, red pieces dominated the board. The Royal Navy was hemorrhaging ships. February alone saw 63 vessels sunk, 342,000 tons committed to the ocean floor, 2,300 sailors drowned. Current loss trajectories meant Britain would exhaust fuel supplies by July, food reserves by September. The war would conclude with Germany starving Britain into capitulation without ever mounting an invasion. Royal Navy doctrine was the fundamental problem. Specifically, one doctrine, the foundational tactical principle every officer absorbed at Dartmouth Naval College, the principle that had governed British naval warfare for 2 centuries. Aggressive offence wins naval engagements. Hunt the enemy. Engage decisively. Eliminate their combat capability. It had proven effective against Napoleon's fleet, successful in the First World War, devastating against surface vessels, because surface vessels couldn't vanish. But U-boats weren't surface vessels. U-boats submerged, disappeared, evaded. Every time a British escort abandoned convoy position to pursue a diving U-boat, the convoy became exponentially more vulnerable. German wolfpack commanders understood this principle intimately. They weaponized it. One U-boat would deliberately reveal its position, draw escorts away, manufacture gaps. Then the remaining wolfpack would strike through those openings. It was mathematically elegant, tactically brilliant, devastatingly effective. British escorts fell for it consistently because doctrine demanded aggressive hunting, because 200 years of naval tradition insisted offence wins battles, because officers with 30 years of service couldn't conceive that British naval warfare's foundational principle had become obsolete. Janet possessed no experience, no naval tradition, no doctrinal training, just mathematics and pattern recognition, and 8 months of simulation data proving that aggressive pursuit destroyed convoys. Her recruitment to WATU had come in July 1942, directly from academic studies. She'd been pursuing mathematics, achieving top marks, demonstrating exceptional geometric reasoning abilities. Her instructors noted she identified patterns other students overlooked. When war commenced, she'd wanted to contribute. She applied to the WRNS, Women's Royal Naval Service. They inquired about her education, her mathematical capabilities, whether she could function under pressure. She confirmed. 3 weeks later, orders arrived directing her to Derby House, Western Approach's tactical unit. She'd never encountered the name. Classified operations, top secret designation, officially non-existent. She arrived in July. Captain Gilbert Roberts outlined the mission. They were engineering tactical innovations through wargaming, full-scale floor simulations with stopwatch timing and mathematical measurement. WRNS personnel would role-play U-boat commanders, officers would command convoys, the games would be ruthlessly realistic. The objective was identifying functional tactics, teaching those tactics to every escort commander in the Atlantic, saving the convoys, winning the war. Roberts explained the WRNS were selected specifically for their absence of naval experience, fresh perspectives, no doctrinal bias, no preconceived assumptions about naval warfare mechanics. Officers with decades of experience kept repeating identical mistakes because experience had taught them incorrect lessons. The U-boats were winning because British tactics were predictable. Textbook and predictability meant death. Janet was assigned U-boat commander roleplay. She would simulate German wolfpack tactics, attack simulated convoys commanded by actual Royal Navy officers. Her objective was sinking them. The inaugural game occurred July 15, 1942. Simulated convoy, 40 merchant ships, 6 escort destroyers, standard formation. Commander Harrison commanded the escorts, 32 years experience, Jutland veteran, decorated officer. Janet commanded 4 U-boats. She'd studied captured German tactical manuals for 3 days, absorbed wolfpack doctrine, shadowing procedures, surface night attacks. Roberts signalled. The game commenced. Harrison deployed his escorts in a wide defensive perimeter, standard doctrine, overlapping search patterns, aggressive positioning. Janet observed for 30 minutes, studied the formation, identified the gaps, calculated timing. She manoeuvred her lead U-boat into visual range, allowed Harrison's escort to detect her position, deliberately exposed herself. Harrison responded exactly as doctrine prescribed. 2 escorts broke formation, pursued her submarine. Star shells, depth charges, aggressive pursuit. Janet's U-boat submerged, escaped. The escorts spent 18 minutes hunting her before abandoning the search and returning to convoy position. During those 18 minutes, Janet's remaining 3 U-boats penetrated the gaps the escorts had created, breached the convoy screen, initiated attacks. By the time Harrison's escorts returned, 6 merchant ships were sinking. The simulation markers glowed red. The mathematics was brutal. Harrison attempted adjustments, pulled escorts back to seal the gaps. But Janet's U-boats had already penetrated interior positions. They continued attacking, continued sinking ships. The simulation concluded 43 minutes after commencement. 12 merchant ships destroyed, 4 escorts damaged, 0 U-boats sunk. Complete massacre. Harrison was furious. The game was rigged, he insisted. Janet didn't comprehend actual naval combat. U-boats couldn't actually breach escort screens that effectively. Roberts retrieved casualty reports from June. Convoy ON-113, 16 ships sunk, 7 escorts present. The U-boats had employed the identical tactics Janet just demonstrated. Harrison went silent, stared at the reports, stared at Janet, stared at the chalk marks illustrating how his convoy had been annihilated. He'd been commanding escorts for 18 months, following doctrine flawlessly. A 19-year-old girl had just revealed why his tactics were killing British sailors. Roberts asked Harrison what he'd do differently next engagement. Harrison admitted he didn't know. Doctrine mandated aggressive pursuit. If escorts didn't chase U-boats, the submarines would simply continue attacking until they destroyed the entire convoy. Janet said no. If escorts maintained convoy position, U-boats couldn't penetrate. If U-boats couldn't penetrate, they couldn't sink anything. Harrison called that passive defense cowardice. The Royal Navy attacked always. Janet said the Royal Navy was losing. Roberts ran the simulation again. Identical scenario, same officers, altered tactics. This time, Harrison's escort stayed tight to the convoy. Compact defensive screen. When Janet's lead U-boat appeared, the escorts didn't pursue. They closed ranks, created an impenetrable barrier surrounding the merchant ships. Janet tried finding gaps. None existed. The escorts were too tight, too coordinated. She tried drawing them away. They wouldn't budge. Harrison had ordered them to hold position regardless of circumstances. Janet's U-boats couldn't penetrate, couldn't acquire firing solutions, couldn't accomplish anything except circle outside the screen, waiting for opportunities that never materialized. 90 minutes elapsed. 0 merchant ships sunk. 0 escorts pulled from position. All 4 U-boats forced to retreat. Complete defensive victory. Harrison asked if actual U-boats would genuinely withdraw like that. Roberts produced German after-action reports from captured documents. U-boat commanders described encountering tight escort screens they called hedgehogs, impenetrable defensive formations they couldn't crack. They'd circle for hours, then withdraw without attacking because the risk was prohibitive. Harrison understood immediately. The mathematics was obvious. If escorts stayed close, U-boats couldn't win. But implementing that doctrine meant retraining every escort commander in the Atlantic. Thousands of officers. Decades of tradition. The entire institutional culture of the Royal Navy. And the Admiralty wasn't interested in receiving lectures from teenage girls playing floor games. Between July 1942 and February 1943, Watteau executed 473 simulations. Different scenarios, different officers, different convoy sizes. The pattern remained consistent. Officers following doctrine lost convoys. Officers maintaining tight escorts won. But the Admiralty ignored the reports. Simulations weren't actual combat, they insisted. Watteau was experimental. Tradition and experience mattered more than chalk on floors. Convoys kept dying. February became the war's worst month. 63 ships, 2,300 sailors, including Thomas. Convoy SC-121 was the breaking point. 13 ships lost. HMS Hesperus destroyed. 117 sailors dead. The casualty reports arrived at Derby House on March 1st. Complete documentation, ship-by-ship breakdown, tactical analysis. Janet read every detail. The escorts had followed doctrine perfectly, chased U-boats aggressively, left gaps in the screen. The wolfpack penetrated those gaps, slaughtered the convoy. Everything Janet had predicted, everything she'd warned about, everything the Admiralty had ignored. Her brother died because admirals wouldn't listen to a 19-year-old with chalk. Roberts found her in the pit that afternoon. She was running the SC-121 simulation, playing it out on the floor, matching the actual attack pattern from the German perspective. Roberts asked what she was doing. Janet said she was proving that Thomas died following orders she'd proven fatal 8 months ago. Roberts said he was sorry. The Admiralty should have listened. Watteau had been correct all along. Janet said being correct didn't matter if nobody changed their tactics. Reports didn't save convoys. 8 months of simulations hadn't prevented SC-121. Roberts asked what she wanted. Janet said she wanted Admiral Horton, the man commanding the entire western approaches. She wanted him in the pit, wanted him commanding a convoy while she sank him using the exact tactics that killed Thomas, wanted to prove to his face that Royal Navy doctrine was murdering British sailors. Roberts said Horton would never agree. He was one of Britain's most decorated submarine hunters, First World War veteran legend. He wouldn't subject himself to lectures from WRNS personnel. Janet said, make him agree. Tell him WATU has tactical innovations that could save the Atlantic convoys. Tell him if he wants to see them, he has to play the game. Roberts considered, then nodded. He transmitted the request to Horton's office. Formal invitation. Western approaches. Tactical unit demonstration. March 3rd. New tactical doctrines developed through wargaming simulations. Horton accepted. He'd heard about Watteau. Curious about their methods, skeptical about their claims, but curious. March 3rd, 1943, 8:47 a.m. Admiral Max Horton arrived at Derby House. Roberts briefed him, explained the simulations, the mathematical modelling, the tactical testing. Watteau had developed innovations that could transform the Battle of the Atlantic. Horton listened, took notes, offered no commentary. Then he said he wanted to command the escorts personally, see if these teenage girls could actually sink him. Roberts agreed. They established the simulation. 50 merchant ships, 8 escort destroyers, complex scenario, mid-Atlantic winter conditions, limited visibility. Janet commanded 3 U-boats. Jean Laidlaw commanded 3 more. Both had been playing for 8 months. They knew every weakness, every gap, every moment of vulnerability in standard escort doctrine. Horton assumed command of the escorts, studied the board, positioned his destroyers exactly as doctrine prescribed. Wide defensive perimeter, aggressive coverage, overlapping search zones. Janet recognized the formation immediately. Standard pattern. Same pattern Harrison had used. Same pattern every officer used because doctrine prescribed it. Same pattern that had killed Thomas. Roberts gave the signal. The game began. Janet watched Horton's formation, calculated the gaps, planned her approach. She didn't feel angry, didn't feel sad, just cold mathematical focus. She'd killed Thomas in simulations 63 times over 8 months, using German tactics against British doctrine, proving the doctrine was fatal. Now she'd kill Horton the same way, using the same tactics, exploiting the same gaps, making him watch his convoy die because his tactics created opportunities for patient U-boat commanders. She moved her lead U-boat into visual range at 9:14 a.m., let Horton's escort spot her, deliberately exposed her position. Horton responded immediately. 2 escorts broke formation, pursued her submarine. Star shells, depth charges, aggressive pursuit, textbook response. Janet's U-boat submerged, disappeared. She started the timer. While Horton's escorts chased her, Jean's U-boats were moving into the gaps they'd left. Horton's formation was collapsing. Escorts were scattered. The convoy was exposed. Janet surfaced her lead U-boat again, different position. Drew another escort away. Horton was attempting to cover the gaps, attempting to maintain screen integrity. But he was following doctrine, and doctrine said pursue aggressively. Every time he chased, he created new gaps. Every gap was an opportunity. Every opportunity was a dead merchant ship. Jean's U-boats penetrated the screen at 9:31 a.m., got inside the convoy formation, started attacking. Horton pulled his escorts back, tried protecting the convoy, but Janet's submarines had already repositioned. They attacked from different angles, coordinated assault. The simulation ended at 10:01 a.m., 47 minutes, 17 merchant ships destroyed. Horton's escorts had sunk 0 U-boats. The convoy was devastated. The room fell silent. Horton stared at the board, at the red chalk marks, at the 17 destroyed ships that would have been 1,700 dead sailors in actual combat. Janet stood there holding her chalk, 19 years old, 2 days after her brother's funeral, staring at the Admiral who'd just followed the doctrine that killed Thomas. Robert started to speak. Horton raised his hand. Silence. Then Horton looked at Janet, looked at Jean, looked at the destroyed convoy on the floor, and said 5 words that changed the entire Battle of the Atlantic. "This works. Teach every commander." Janet felt nothing. No relief, no satisfaction. Just the knowledge that it had taken her brother's death to make an admiral listen. Horton spent 2 hours questioning them. How did they predict escort movements? How did they exploit gaps so effectively? How did they coordinate attacks so precisely? Janet explained. Mathematics, pattern recognition, timing calculations, where escorts would be when they reacted, how long they'd stay away from the convoy, how those absences created penetration opportunities. All of it could be calculated. All of it could be predicted. All of it could be exploited. Horton understood. He'd been a submarine commander 30 years ago. He'd used similar tactics, but he'd never analysed them from the convoy escort perspective. He'd never realised how predictable British doctrine made escort responses, how exploitable the tactics were, how every aggressive chase created opportunities for patient wolfpack commanders. He asked why the Admiralty hadn't implemented Wattu's recommendations. Robert said the Admiralty thought simulations weren't realistic, that experience trumped floor games. Horton asked how many convoys Wattu's analysis predicted would fail using current doctrine. Janet said all of them. If escorts kept chasing U-boats, every convoy would lose ships. The mathematics was absolute. Horton asked if she could prove that. Janet said she already had, 63 times in 8 months, including convoy SC-121 on February 24th. She'd run that exact scenario 8 days before the real convoy sailed. Predicted the escorts would chase U-boats. Predicted the wolfpack would penetrate the gaps. Predicted 13 ships would sink. 13 ships sank exactly as she had calculated. Horton went quiet, asked if any of those ships had been Royal Navy vessels. Janet said yes. HMS Hesperus, destroyer lost with all hands, including her brother. Horton stared at her. Didn't speak for 30 seconds. Then he asked what tactics would have saved the convoy. Janet walked him through it. Tight escort screen. No chasing. Maintain formation integrity. Close all gaps. Make the convoy impenetrable. She ran the simulation again. Same scenario, same U-boats, different escort tactics. This time, the escort stayed tight. No matter what Janet did, they wouldn't break formation, wouldn't chase, wouldn't create gaps. Her U-boats couldn't penetrate, couldn't get firing solutions, couldn't do anything except circle uselessly outside the screen. 0 merchant ships sunk, 0 escorts damaged. Complete defensive victory. Horton asked if real U-boat commanders would actually withdraw when facing tight screens. Roberts showed him captured German after-action reports, U-boats encountering impenetrable defensive formations, descriptions of British escorts that formed iron rings they couldn't breach, multiple reports of wolfpacks withdrawing without attacking because penetration was impossible. Horton nodded slowly. Then he gave orders. Every escort commander in the western approaches would be trained at Weight-U. Every single one. No exceptions. They would learn the new doctrine. They would practice against WRNS playing German tactics. They would lose simulations repeatedly until they understood why aggressive pursuit killed convoys, and they would implement tight defensive screens immediately. The order went out March 4th. Within a week, officers started arriving at Derby House. Dozens of them. Commanders with decades of experience. Lieutenants fresh from training. All forced to sit in a freezing basement while teenage girls sank their convoys and explained why. Some officers were receptive, understood immediately, saw the mathematics, changed their tactics. Others were resistant, insulted, angry that girls were teaching them naval warfare. Roberts didn't argue. He just ran the simulations. Let the mathematics speak. Resistant officers got the same treatment. They'd command escorts. Janet and the other WRNS would play U-boats using actual German tactics from captured documents, and the WRNS would sink them repeatedly, brutally, mathematically. After 3 straight massacres, most officers stopped arguing. They learned, they adapted, they changed. Janet developed a reputation. Officers called her the killer. She was merciless in simulations, exploited every mistake, punished every doctrinal decision, sank convoys with surgical precision. Some officers complained she was too aggressive, unrealistic. Real U-boats couldn't operate that effectively. Roberts would pull out German casualty reports, real convoy battles, real sinkings. The numbers matched Janet's simulations almost perfectly. U-boats were doing in real combat exactly what Janet did with chalk on a floor. The difference was Janet made officers watch themselves fail, made them understand why they failed, made them see that following doctrine meant sailors died. Between March and July 1943, Watteau trained 2,500 Royal Navy officers. Every lesson was documented. Every successful tactic was recorded. Every officer left Derby House with explicit instructions on implementing defensive escort screens. The tactical innovations had names: Raspberry, Beta Search, Pineapple, Step Aside. Each one addressed specific vulnerabilities in old doctrine. Raspberry was rapid illumination. When a U-boat appeared, all escorts would fire star shells in coordinated patterns. Full perimeter coverage in 90 seconds instead of 8 minutes. No shadows, no hiding places, no opportunities for other submarines to penetrate while escorts were repositioning. Beta Search was mathematical prediction, Jean Laidlaw's innovation. U-boats shadowed convoys from predictable positions based on convoy speed, heading, and moon phase. Beta Search plotted those positions. Escorts would move there preemptively, force U-boats to submerge or retreat before they could attack. Pineapple was coordinated evasion against wolfpack saturation attacks. When multiple U-boats attacked simultaneously, escorts would execute overlapping zigzag patterns with continuous star shell coverage, creating interlocking fields of fire that made coordinated attacks nearly impossible. Step Aside was acoustic torpedo evasion, Bobby House's innovation. German engineers had developed torpedoes that homed in on propeller noise. Step Aside used precisely timed course changes to break acoustic lock. The torpedoes would lose tracking and miss. All of these tactics were developed by WRNS personnel. Janet, Jean, Bobby House, June Duncan, Margaret Roberts. 5 girls who'd never been to sea. They developed the tactics by running thousands of simulations, testing variables, measuring results, refining techniques until they were mathematically perfect. Then they taught those tactics to officers who outranked them by decades and didn't want to learn from teenagers. The results were immediate. May 1943. German U-boats suffered their worst losses of the entire war. 41 submarines sunk in 31 days. Grand Admiral Dönitz called it Black May. The U-boat fleet was being slaughtered. By June, Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic. The wolfpacks were decimated. The convoy routes were secure. British merchant ship losses dropped 73% between March and September. Convoys were getting through. Supplies were reaching Britain. The starvation threat was over. The Battle of the Atlantic turned in 4 months. Not because of technology, not because of Enigma decryption. Because teenage girls with chalk had proven that defensive escort tactics worked and aggressive pursuit didn't. Because Janet Okell had used her brother's death to force the Royal Navy to change doctrine that had been killing sailors for 3 years. Thomas's ship was never replaced. HMS Hesperus was lost. But the tactics that killed his convoy were abandoned. Every convoy after March 1943 used tight defensive screens, stayed together, didn't chase submarines into gaps. The convoys survived, thousands of them, tens of thousands of sailors, all saved because escorts stopped following doctrine that teenage girls had proven was fatal. Janet continued working at Watteau until May 1945. 3 years in the pit, running simulations, teaching officers, developing tactics. She trained over 5,000 Allied commanders personally, American officers, Canadian, Norwegian, Polish. Every navy that ran Atlantic convoys sent commanders to Derby House to learn from the WRNS. The tactical innovations became standard doctrine. The US Navy adopted Raspberry and Beta Search in July 1943. The Canadian Navy implemented Pineapple and Step Aside by January 1944. By mid-1944, German U-boat operations in the North Atlantic had essentially ceased. The submarines were still active elsewhere, But the convoy routes were secure. The Atlantic was won. When the war ended, Watteau was classified. Everything they'd done was buried in top-secret files. The runs were bound by the Official Secrets Act. Couldn't talk about their service. Couldn't tell families. Couldn't mention it in job applications. Janet married in 1947, had 3 children, lived quietly, worked as a mathematics teacher. Never mentioned the war. For 30 years, nobody except a handful of Watteau veterans knew what she'd accomplished. In 1974, the government partially declassified Watteau operations. Books started appearing about the Battle of the Atlantic. Most focused on technology, radar, sonar, Enigma, the machines that won the war. The WRNs were footnotes. When mentioned at all, they were described as support staff or game facilitators, not tactical innovators, not the people who'd rewritten Royal Navy doctrine. Janet didn't care about recognition. She'd done her duty, saved lives. That was enough. But naval historians eventually found Watteau records, started realizing the unit's impact was larger than anyone had acknowledged. In 1998, a comprehensive study concluded that Watteau's tactical innovations had saved approximately 4,000 merchant ships and 48,000 Allied sailors between 1943 and 1945. 4,000 ships that would have been sunk. 48,000 sailors who would have drowned. Saved because teenage girls saw patterns Admirals missed. Janet was 73 when the book was published. She granted a few interviews, was modest, deflective, said it was a team effort, said Captain Roberts deserved credit. But officers who'd been trained there remembered differently. They remembered Janet standing at the plotting table with chalk, sinking their convoys repeatedly until they understood why aggressive pursuit killed sailors. Admiral Sir John Fouan, who trained at Watteau in April 1943, said in an interview, "Miss Okell taught me more about anti-submarine warfare in 3 days than I'd learned in 3 years at sea. She destroyed my convoy 6 times in a row and explained with such mathematical precision why I'd failed that I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. She saved my life. She saved my entire convoy group, and she did it with chalk on a floor before I ever left port." Janet Patricia Okell died November 5, 2009. She was 86 years old. Her obituary in the Times was 1 paragraph. Former WRNS officer who served in naval operations during World War II. No details. No mention of Watteau. No mention of the 48,000 lives saved, but the tactics survived. The innovations she'd helped develop are still taught in naval academies worldwide. The US Naval War College teaches escort doctrine based on Watteau principles. The Royal Navy's tactical manual includes Raspberry and Beta search variants. None credit her directly. The tactics were absorbed into standard doctrine, divorced from their creators. But if you visit the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, there's a small exhibit about Watteau. Photographs of the pit, chalk floor grids, ship and submarine models, brief description of the wargaming process. One photograph shows the Watteau staff, 1943, 11 WRNS in the pit. Janet is third from the left, 19 years old, piece of chalk in her hand, looking directly at the camera. She looks determined, focused, completely unaware that the innovation she was developing would save 48,000 lives. That photograph is Janet's real legacy. Not recognition, not fame, not credit. The chalk, the mathematics, the pattern recognition, the courage to tell admirals their doctrine was murdering sailors when thousands were dying because nobody would change. That's how wars are actually won. Not through brilliant generals. Through mathematicians who notice doctrine is failing and have the courage to prove it. Through people like Janet who calculate what works, demonstrate what doesn't, and force institutional change while people are actively dying. Janet Okell stood in a freezing basement with chalk 2 days after her brother's funeral and proved to Britain's most decorated submarine hunter that his doctrine had murdered her brother and would murder thousands more unless he changed immediately. She sank his convoy in 47 minutes, used the exact tactics that killed Thomas, made Horton watch every mistake, every gap, every dead merchant ship, made him understand that tradition and experience were killing British sailors and mathematics could save them. And almost nobody knows her name. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favour, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people who care about the heroes who got forgotten. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing these stories from archives and obscurity every single week. You're not just a viewer, you're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching.